secondary sources, and no contact. Other commentators about narcissism omit the secondary source in terms of the nature of the dynamic. Most comment about the interaction between the narcissist and a primary source, namely idealization, seduction, devaluation, and thereafter disengagement or discard, followed by hoovering. That is but one form of the dynamic between narcissist and the victim, and there are many others. And often overlooked is the role of the secondary source. So what happens when a secondary source imposes no contact as against the narcissist? Many of you will be secondary sources, or have been secondary sources to narcissists, and you may not even have realised it. What are the secondary sources? Non-intimate secondary sources. Friends, family members, colleagues. Interaction with somebody on a professional basis who you know reasonably well. Your doctor, a therapist, dentist, a lawyer. Intimate partner, secondary source of a shelf variety. This is somebody who is dating or is having an affair with the narcissist. A friend with benefits, a booty call, the mistress, the side piece. Someone who in effect is treated to the shelving dynamic, whereby the narcissist hoovers, takes the appliance off the shelf, interacts with them for a period, and then puts them back on. The dirty little secret. This is also an intimate partner of the narcissist, also a secondary source, and is treated to the shelving dynamic. They are far more compartmentalized compared to the intimate partner secondary source. There is additional material about the dirty little secret which can be accessed. Accordingly, secondary source covers non-intimate secondary sources, intimate partner secondary source of a shelf variety, and the dirty little secret. What is the nature of the dynamic? It is one of shelving. The narcissist hoovers the secondary source by taking them off the shelf. This might be a text exchange, a telephone conversation, or meeting up. The narcissist interacts with this individual, asserting control over them, usually in a benign way, drawing fuel, possibly character traits and residual benefits, and then at the end of the interaction, the individual is placed back on the shelf. The individual may not be interacted with for an hour before being taken off the shelf again, or it might be a month. It all depends on whether there is a Hoover trigger and the Hoover execution criteria are met. But the dynamic between the narcissist and a secondary source is one of shelving. Namely, the narcissist does not interact frequently, almost all of the time, with the individual, doesn't live with them. It might be the case, for instance, with a friend, that friend is interacted with some comfort crumbs and meets up once a month for dinner with the narcissist. They're taken off the shelf and have dinner with the narcissist. In an intimate setting, the little secret might be somebody who every Monday after work meets up for a bunk up in the back of a car, or goes to a hotel on a Tuesday evening for dinner and a shag. They might get the occasional telephone call. The intimate partner, secondary source of a shelf variety, might be somebody who's taken off the shelf and gets a weekend away with the narcissist, interacting as a part of a dynamic with other intimate partner secondary sources. Or they might be the affair partner, so that they know that the narcissist is in a relationship with someone else, and they occasionally meet up with that individual for the purposes of spending time together, invariably future faked as the narcissist's intention to leave the intimate partner primary source for them. But the dynamic between the narcissist and the secondary source is one of shelving. It is, if you will, an on-off interaction. If you want to understand more about this dynamic and also how the narcissist views you, please go to the Knowledge Vault on obtain Shelf Life, Deciphering What Is Going On, and Black or White on the Shelf. That'll answer many questions for you as to the nature of the way the narcissist behaves with you when you are in this shelf dynamic. When you are in this shelf dynamic, as I've explained in the video, the golden period, you are invariably actually treated rather well, for the most part, with occasional corrective devaluations. And I explain in the golden period why that is. But life as a secondary source, especially as an intimate one, is the life of an outcast. The afterthought, second best, often waiting around for that telephone call, waiting on the opportunity to spend time together, suddenly finding a date being cancelled, finding out that the narcissist has gone out with somebody else when they made an excuse that they were ill. Repeated disappointments, frustrations and irritations. It is a lonely path that the intimate partner secondary source travels. That can similarly happen to a non-intimate secondary source, but is less common. Thus the question is posed, when you are in the position of being a secondary source, what happens when you finally decide, this is enough? I become weaponized. I have drunk deep at the well of Tudor and learned about what is actually going on, that I am dealing with a narcissist, and it's time to say no more. You impose no contact. We shall assume that you have digested my works and the material in the knowledge vault so that your no contact regime is total. You're not going to spend any time with the narcissist, so you're not going to open the door to them if they happen to come knocking. You have implemented a complete electronic embargo. The narcissist can't message you, can't telephone you, can't contact you on social media. It is a proper no-contact regime. When this is done, how does the narcissist react to this? Well, of course, the first point to make is this. Why should you actually care? Once you've determined that you're dealing with a narcissist, you should apply the first golden rule of freedom. Once you know you go, you get out and you stay out. And that includes not caring about how the narcissist is reacting to it. Of course, the reality is somewhat different. The presence of your high emotional thinking will cause you to want to think, yes, but how will the narcissist react? Will it cause me problems? What will he or she do? And whilst counsel of perfection is that you should put those thoughts from your mind, they will manifest. And therefore, as part of my role of giving you accurate and whole information, is to explain to you how the narcissist reacts when you, as a secondary source, impose no contact. The first point is the narcissist might not actually notice that you've done it, because the most important thing is you must not tip off the narcissist. So what you don't do is send a message to the narcissist saying, I'm sick and tired of being given the runaround by you, you're never going to leave your wife, it is over. Because all you'll then do is give the narcissist an opportunity to respond to that threat to the assertion of his control. You have issued challenge fuel, and the narcissist is duty-bound to respond to that. He will likely see your text and, in all likelihood, will seek to respond to it by contacting you immediately, perhaps before you have implemented your no-contact regime. Your emotional thinking will surge, and you risk not imposing no contact. Don't believe me? I've seen it happen many, many times. Your already high emotional thinking is increased further by the fact that you are interacting with the narcissist hoovers you, pleading with you, don't do this, let's speak, give me a chance to explain things to you, and you get suckered back in. Your emotional thinking corrupts your empathic traits of compassion. It corrupts your empathic trait of being a truth seeker. And therefore it causes you to be drawn back in. That you give the narcissist a further chance, that you want to hear what he's got to say about it. Indeed, certain individuals fall into the trap of saying this with no real intention of implementing no contact regime, but they're doing this to try and provoke the narcissist because they want to get a response from the narcissist because they've not heard from them. You do not ever tip off the narcissist that you are about to implement a no contact regime, and this is just as applicable to you as a secondary source. Don't do it. Although you may feel that it would be satisfying to do this, indeed sometimes you think that it's almost fair to do this, that you're tying up the loose ends, that you're doing the right thing by explaining to the narcissist that it's over. No, that is emotional thinking. Do not do it. You will cause a preventative Hoover to be issued, and you will likely then fall back in with the relationship with the narcissist, missing the opportunity to impose no contact. Accordingly, when you impose no contact as a secondary source, you do so without tipping the narcissist off. And that means you will invariably do so when you're on the shelf. And that means that because you've not tipped the narcissist off and you are not currently interacting with the narcissist may not even realize that you have implemented no contact. That, of course, means that your emotional thinking will shout and scream because it wants you to continue to interact with the narcissist, and it will con you into wanting to have some kind of reaction from the narcissist. You want that validation that somehow the narcissist is angry, frustrated, upset, wounded by what you have done, in order to make you feel good, that you are now asserting some control, getting a bit of power back. You should remove such thoughts from your head. They are the premise of emotional thinking. First of all, the narcissist may not notice that you've implemented no contact, but the narcissist will notice at a future point. It might be 30 minutes later, it could be 2 weeks later, but the narcissist will notice. Why? Because even though you have not caused a Hoover trigger, you are still at risk of there being one, because the narcissist will invariably be reminded of you in some way. For instance, it's Monday. That's when I bunk up with Marina behind the back of Walmart in the back of my car. I give her a call, make sure all's good, her end, for us to do that again. So he's reminded by the anniversary of the Monday mucky bunk up behind Walmart. Or somebody mentions your name. Or you just pop into the narcissist's head. So you enter that sixth sphere of influence, irrespective of what you're doing. This causes a Hoover trigger. And invariably, at that point, the narcissist, completely unaware that he or she is blocked, that you've changed your number, that you've put yourself out of reach, that you've come off social media, that you have blocked on social media, etc., you will be hoovered. And thus the narcissist, for instance, telephones you. They immediately find this number is not in use if you've done the sensible thing of changing your number, or they just get a ringing. They will be wounded because you have not responded. Narcissism will then cause them to try and assert control over you again, and they'll probably ring you again. Or, if they're not able to because you've changed your number, they may well shift to an alternative method. They will try and send you a message through a different social media. They will then find that they get no response that way. And basically, when the narcissist tries to hoover you and finds that you're not responding, either because they realise the hoover hasn't got through, because they're able to see that they have been blocked, that you're not reading the message, or that there's been no response, and the narcissist doesn't realise that they have been blocked, etc. All they know is that you're not responding. This will wound the narcissist. You are not providing fuel, and you're threatening the narcissist's control. Therefore, the narcissist will have to try and assert control, and may continue to do so by hoovering you, sending further messages, until there will come a point where the narcissism, in the unconscious of the lesser or mid-range, will basically say this. You're trying to assert control over this individual. You've carried out repeated direct assertions of control by hoovering, that you have received no response. Fuel levels are dropping, you're being repeatedly wounding, you do not have control over this individual. Accordingly, you must shift to a different assertion of control. And therefore, the narcissist will shift perhaps to smearing you. If, for example, you're in a dating scenario and you've been mentioned to one of the narcissist's friends, he may comment upon the fact that, I don't believe it, she's ghosted on me, he will say. And if sympathy is provided by that friend, that enables the narcissist to feel like they've got control over you. And in that moment, having obtained control and received fuel from their friend, they will, for the moment, not bother about hoovering you further. Why? They've got control. That's what matters. They've received fuel from the friend, not from you. Of course, the next day, you may come back up on the radar again. The friend might say, hey, have you heard anything from Samantha? That means that you come on the radar. The narcissism then says, is Samantha under control? No, she's not. We must get control over her. Shall we hoover her? And the narcissism, and remember, this is what is going on in the unconscious of the narcissist. The narcissism says, actually, no, we can't hoover her because we tried several times yesterday and that failed. We are a self-defense mechanism, so we are not going to make our narcissist try and hoover her again. Therefore, we will assert control by the indirect assertion of control and cause him to smear again to his friend. No, I've not heard anything from her, but I'm not that bothered about her. She was a bit of a lunatic, actually. So there's this much. I'm having a date with Jane. She's far more interesting. And therefore, through triangulation and smearing, the narcissist asserts control over you, the absent intimate partner secondary source, or dirty little secret, obtains fuel from the friend, and there is no attempt to contact you. And you might come back on the radar the following day. So, for instance, another friend says, "Hey, how's those dates going with Samantha?" And again, the narcissism says, "No point hoovering. It's only 2 days hence we suffered repeated wounding. Therefore, we are not going to expose the narcissist to that again. Accordingly, we will cause him to assert control over Samantha by smearing her and triangulating her with this new source." Oh, her old news. Bit of an odd bod, really, mate. But I went out on a date with Jane last night. Really great. And then what will happen is that for the most part, with your no contact regime being in place, the effect of the wounding will last for a period of time, combined with the fact that the narcissist will be focusing on other appliances. As an intimate partner secondary source, you are important, but you're not the most important, and you are not subjected to the frenzied initial ground hoover that an escaped intimate partner primary source receives. Instead, there will be attempts to hoover you, but if they don't get through because you have sensibly put in place a solid no-contact regime, the narcissist will shift to asserting control by the second assertion of control or the third assertion of control, indirectly or withdrawal. And as I have repeated, and I will continue to do so, if you want to understand narcissism, go to the Knowledge Vault and obtain the 3 assertions of control. It's hugely important. And then, because you are fairly important, or rather very important within the fuel matrix, but not the most important individual, the narcissist isn't moved to continue to hoover you because the narcissism steers him away from that. And every time you come up on the radar, the narcissist is able to assert control over you by either smearing you or basically not being bothered about you anymore. And this will continue until the hoover triggers will be less and less and less. The friends don't mention you because you're not around anymore. And if you just happen to pop into the head of the narcissist, you come up on the radar, but the narcissist is focused perhaps on somebody who is a candidate intimate partner secondary source, and therefore they are of greater interest. So even if you pop into the head of the narcissism just rejects you, third assertion of control, and they focus on the new candidate, and you end up being left alone. Of course, circumstances can alter. If you are complacent and allow holes in your no-contact regime, if, for instance, the narcissist is having difficulties advancing a new intimate partner secondary source, then a hoover may happen because the effect of the wounding fades with time. The reset button occurs. So just because your no-contact regime repeatedly wounded the narcissist will not keep the narcissist away for good. It means he will try again, maybe 6 months' time, but if you have maintained that solid no-contact regime, he will then be wounded once again and will assert control by the second or third assertion of control, and you continue to be left alone. In some instances, the narcissist might shift from hoovering you electronically by coming around to try and hoover you physically, turning up at where you work or your home, catching you at the gym. The narcissist will do this if the hoover execution criteria are met. The narcissist will do this if, for example, other options within the fuel matrix are limited, and it's comparatively easy for him to come and do this. He's not going to get on a plane and fly to another continent. He will look out different appliances instead. He will seduce new ones and make them IPSSs. But if you are just 10 minutes drive away, for example, the narcissist will, having been able to assert control by hoovering you electronically, be likely to give you a physical hoover. It might be indirect to begin with, perhaps driving by to see if that provokes some kind of response from you, testing the waters in effect. Remember, for the lesser and mid-range narcissist, this is occurring instinctively. For a greater, or the ultra, this will be a calculated act. But the greater and the ultra are more likely just to leave you be, because there will be lots of other intimate partner secondary sources in the fuel matrix, and it's just as easy to switch to one of them and leave you be. In effect, the narcissist may try to hoover you, realise this is not working, and therefore asserts control by deciding wasn't interested in them anyway, and shifts to a different IPPS. Far easier to do that than to keep committing a redundant action. So, the greater and the ultra are more likely to actually just leave you alone as a consequence of that no contact regime, because whilst you are important, you are not the most important in the fuel matrix, and there are other appliances of a similar rank for you, or of a similar rank to you. Graters and the Ultra will invariably have numerous IPSSs, numerous DLSs, and therefore what happens is when you can't be hoovered, the narcissist just shifts to them instead and leaves you be. Lesser and mid-range are more likely to try and hoover you for a period of time because they won't have as many IPSSs in their fuel matrices, being lower echelon narcissists. However, they may have at least one other, and if they can't interact with you because of your solid no-contact regime, this forces them to go elsewhere and in effect leave you alone for a period of time. So accordingly, when you impose no contact on the narcissist, when the narcissist learns that they can't contact you, that the calls are not being returned, that there's no emails responding, that there's no text messages in response, it wounds the narcissist. The narcissist may continue to hoover electronically until such point as the narcissism says this is not achieving anything, and therefore will shift the narcissist possibly to hoovering you physically, or asserting control through the second or third assertions of control instead. If the narcissist hoovers you physically, of course, you maintain no contact by not answering the door, by walking away from the narcissist, which will also wound. And in those circumstances, the narcissist may try again, calling out to you, trying to get your attention. But ultimately, if that does not work, the narcissist will be forced to withdraw and may contact a friend to bemoan your, in the eyes of the narcissist, rude behaviour and thus smear you, second assertion of control, or just withdrawal, third assertion of control, and seek out an alternative appliance to provide fuel. And you will be parked for the time being, painted black, left alone. When time passes, the effect of the wounding fades, and, subject to there being a Hoover trigger and the Hoover execution criteria being met, you will be at risk of a further Hoover. However, whether you actually receive that Hoover depends on your no-contact regime. If it remains solid and rigid, the Hoover is effected, but is never executed because you don't get to hear about it. The narcissist can't telephone you, doesn't have the number. The email bounces back. You're not on social media. And then the narcissist might try and contact you physically, or the narcissist may decide that as a consequence of the wounding already sustained, there is no point, and therefore remains in a position of withdrawal and or smears. And therefore, when you are a secondary source, you will wound the narcissist when you impose no contact. But unlike the intimate partner primary source, the narcissist is not going to occasion a sustained campaign against you. However, what invariably happens with the secondary source is the hoovers get through because you don't know how to do no contact properly. You don't change your number, so the narcissist contacts you from an alternative number. You don't block the narcissist, so the calls come through, and you see the text messages piling up, and you eventually give in and respond to one of them. It provokes you, either making you angry, or feeling bad, feeling guilty, or feeling sympathetic, feeling compassionate. The narcissist turns up and pleads with you at the door, and you make the mistake of opening the door. Your emotional thinking rises, corrupts your traits, you invite the narcissist in, and they've ensnared you, and the dance continues. If you maintain a solid no-contact regime, the narcissist will, after a period of time, be forced to assert control by the second or third assertion of control, and will focus on other appliances. Down the line, dependent on circumstances, they may try then and hoover you again, with the effect of the wounding gone. But if you maintain a solid no-contact regime, then of course that hoovering fails. And in essence, you either never hear from the narcissist further because your no-contact regime forbids it, or if the occasional hoover gets through because of your reduced emotional thinking, you are in a much better position to stay in no contact and ignore them. So if the narcissist approached you at work, you just walk away. If you see the narcissist on the other side of the street, you don't react to them calling out to you. And therefore, in the circumstances, the situation between the secondary source and no contact is that it wounds the narcissist. And this also applies to non-intimate secondary sources. The dynamic is similar. Although the narcissist again is less inclined to make much effort because there are even more non-intimate secondary sources available, and the narcissist will just shift to a different one, cutting loose that particular friend in effect, leaving them on the shelf and interacting with other non-intimate secondary sources. Intimate partner secondary sources rank higher in the fuel matrix than non-intimate secondary sources, which means that those intimate partner secondary sources are more likely to be hoovered, but not to the frenzied extent as an intimate partner primary source. Accordingly, when you are a secondary source, if you impose a solid no-contact regime and you do it properly, you are unlikely to hear from the narcissist electronically because you've completely blocked them, and you may get the occasional physical hoover, which you can then repel because you have reduced emotional thinking and you're applying logic. Hoovers may occur in the future, but they will be intermittent. However, if you tip off the narcissist, or you do not have a solid no-contact regime, you will run the risk, and I have seen this happen many times, of being hoovered back in, notwithstanding your intentions. And that is the dynamic and response of the narcissist to where a secondary source imposes no contact.